Welcome in, everybody, to a special edition of Inside Boxing Live. I am your host, Dan Canobbio. On this special edition, we're going to look back at the life of marvelous Marvin Hagler, who passed away at age 66 on March 13th, just a few hours before Showtime and DAZN went on the air on a fight night. And I bring up those Showtime and DAZN because two of the guests joining us here on this remembrance episode addressed Marvin Hagler's death and addressed Marvin Hagler's life, and that was Al Bernstein and Michael Buffer. Our third guest on this show today will also be CompuBox creator Bob Canobbio, my father, who was there for a large chunk of Marvin Hagler's career behind the scenes, and that's the theme of this episode here. Obviously, it's all things Marvin Hagler, but there are three guests, Al Bernstein, Michael Buffer, and Bob Canobbio. Were there for all those wars during the 80s. We're there behind the scenes. And I think our first guest, Al Bernstein, will let you know that it was a different time back then when the media and athletes were sort of friends. They hung out, they built a camaraderie, and that shows with what Al Bernstein had to say. That shows, of course, with Michael Buffer, and lastly with Bob Canobbio, who was behind the scenes with CompuBox, there ringside for Hagler Hearns, there ringside for Hagler versus Leonard. Something I wanted to do and put together because I know a lot of boxing fans were shook up when they got the news on March 13th about Marvin Hagler, who was only 66 years old, one of the four kings, a guy that was, you just didn't think this would ever happen to him. He was still healthy, still had all his faculties. That's something that we'll touch on too as well. The fact that he just up and quit after that Leonard fight when he was just 35 years old, when he was still at the top of his game, highest paid athlete in all of sports, not just boxing. Quite the life, quite the career of Marvin Hagler. Let's get into it. Our first guest up is Showtime Sports' Al Bernstein. Let's bring in our next guest here. You know him, another familiar face of boxing, been at it for quite a long time now. Does a great job over on Showtime. You've seen him on ESPN. You've seen Al Bernstein legitimately everywhere. If there's a boxing ring, Al Bernstein is holding a mic in front of it, sometimes in the ring as well. Al, how you doing today?
It's good to be with you. I'm happy to get a chance to visit with you. I love your show.
I love your show too. Al, you're a podcaster now.
Yeah, we're having fun with it. Al Bernstein Unplugged, and we're having fun with it as a podcast and also on the TV networks it's on. A bunch of networks, including Fight TV and Fight Network and Binge Networks and a bunch of others. And I'm having fun with it. You know, it's enjoyable to get a chance to visit with all the different boxing personalities and occasionally branch out, as I did in my last interview with Snoop Dogg, who, of course, is going to be involved in boxing.
Right. Snoop is now involved. Everyone's involved in boxing, I feel like. That's the beauty.
The whole world.
That's the beauty, right? That's the beauty of being involved with boxing. I'm sure over your 40-plus years, you've met people that have no even affiliation with the world of boxing, yet you meet them out at fights and they want to be a part of it. That's the thing. Everyone wants to be a part of boxing, and I'm sure you know that very well. But I wish we were getting together under better terms, but we're here to talk about marvelous Marvin Hagler, a dear friend of yours, a friend of all boxing fans out there. And first off, your tribute on Showtime was very, very well done, and under the circumstances of the fact that, you know, you found out, a few hours beforehand?
Yeah, maybe an hour or so before the show. And so it was difficult because it was crushing, you know. And of course, as a broadcast team, we were kind of scrambling to, first we had to make sure, you know, a lot of times when things start to get reported on social media, you don't know 100% if they're accurate. And so we had to wait to make sure we could verify. Then finally, when we did, we're kind of scrambled to put together throughout the show some tribute material to him. And at the top of the show, I had an opportunity to say a little bit about him. And, you know, it's also hard to compact your feelings about somebody and do their eulogy in like 35 seconds or 40 seconds. So that's a challenge, but I'm happy it came off okay. And, and it's, just a devastating blow to not only to boxing fans around the world, but certainly to those of us that knew him.
You were very close with Marvin, correct?
Yeah, I was, I knew him very well during all the time I was covering him. I broadcast a lot of Marvin Hagler fights. And back in the 80s, things were a little different. You interacted with the boxers in a slightly different way, I think, than now.
Mm-hmm.
It was a more personal way. You saw them more in social settings, and then afterwards, I was around Marvin always a couple of times, 2-3 times a year, even though he was living in Italy, and we kept in communication on a regular basis. He's one of those people that when you see him, you feel like you just picked up with him, like 3 weeks ago. Some people are like that, right?
Yeah.
You just feel that you didn't have a lag in time in communication, and that was the way he was.
No, it's funny because you guys are similar age. So when you were breaking in, and I think Hagler Hearns, you said I read that you were 34 years old.
Right.
Right around the same age as Marvin. So there's a bond there because just look at today.
Yeah, you're right.
Just look at today. I feel like Teofimo Lopez. Not that we're the same age, but there are some fighters that I've become friendly with.
Right.
It happens because you're in the same circles. You're at the same fights. You all share a common love of boxing. But what was it like, being friendly with Marvin? I know we all know the stuff in the ring. We'll get to that. But just him as a person, is there something that you can share with us?
Yeah, what I like about Marvin is, and I said it in the when I was doing the Showtime comments, that the term straight shooter was invented for him. And so, he had it in all his business dealings, which we'll talk about in a moment, with all the people he dealt with in a business way. But he was the same way as somebody you knew. He was going to just tell you what was on his mind, and you could go to the bank on that was a genuine statement. It wasn't some Machiavellian or nefarious reason for him to be telling you that. And so it was always good to communicate with them because you knew you were getting honesty. And I found him to be ingratiating. The fearsome image of him from inside the ring, which is certainly there, was absolutely not Marvin Hagler outside the ring. He was a gregarious, fun-loving guy who, the last time I saw him, perfect example, we were at the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame dinner, and it was an event the night before, and he sat at the table with me, and my sister, who manages me, was there, and she was sitting next to him, and she talked to him more than I did even that night. And at one point, he taps me on the shoulder, and he says to me, he said, "I love your sister." He said, "I think she knows more about boxing than you do."
That's so great. That's so great.
So that's the kind of guy he was. He, just a delightful man.
Did you find it interesting that the fact that from what I read, obviously it's a lot before my time, but I've been able to, listen to stories from my father or from guys like you being around the sport for so long and just hearing secondhand stories. Do you ever find it interesting that a guy that probably, he had a little bit of a mistrust with the media, didn't really always love doing interviews, despite the fact that he always gave great interviews, whether it was Johnny Carson, David Letterman, your pre-fight interview for the Hearns thing. Do you find it interesting that he went off to Italy and became like a movie star?
Yeah, you're right about that. That's an interesting insight. He didn't love doing interviews, and yet I don't think he had bad relations with the press by any stretch. I think if you talk to most press people that covered him, they're not going to say, "Oh, he was hard to cover, he was difficult," and yet he just didn't. The process wasn't something that he loved. I don't think also he loved being having his life be in the spotlight all the time. Wasn't that he didn't like? Anybody that's gonna be a world-class athlete, and as he was, you want some kind of attention because it's good for your career.
Yeah.
But as a human being, he didn't crave that spotlight, and there's a difference, right? Mm-hmm. And that's why it wasn't surprising he could go off to Italy, where he enjoyed being, and he had a love affair with that country, and do some movies, and that was fine. So that still gained him attention, but he didn't need to be in the spotlight the way he was. And that's one of the reasons why he never came back.
Yeah.
Because he didn't crave that.
Yeah, we spoke about this with Michael Buffer, who's a part of this special that we're putting together. And I said to him, and I'm sure you agree with this, the fact that we never saw him get beat up. He knew when to say goodbye, and it added to his mystique.
Yeah, the fact is he was at least 3 or 4 or 5 years older at that point than was being reported.
Right.
So he was at a point in his career where I think he realized it made sense to leave the sport.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a bad taste in his mouth from feeling like he feels like he probably won the Leonard fight and didn't get credit for it, and didn't feel the need to. He felt in his mind that he did enough to win, and so he wasn't anxious for a redo, and didn't feel like he needed to continue.
That's crazy because everyone comes back. I mean, Floyd Mayweather had about 30
Yes.
retirements. Conor McGregor, Michael Jordan retired 3 times. I mean,
Yes.
Everyone comes back, but he didn't. And that, to me, following his career secondhand after it was over, that was the coolest part, because being around fights and being around growing up in the game, it's like you saw a lot of guys come and go at fights, but you never saw Hagler because he didn't really come around a lot. But when you did see him, and when he did make an appearance, it was extra special.
Absolutely, that's exactly right, and you're right about that. Every athlete, just about, and every entertainer who says they're going to retire, they all end up continuing or coming back or doing something. Almost all. I mean, Lennox Lewis might be an example, and though he's still young enough to do it, I think Andre Ward might be another example of that, of somebody that steps away from the sport and doesn't come back. But yeah, and Hagler just didn't feel the need to do that.
Yeah. Speaking of just run-ins with them, I mean, I've told you this when we talked on the phone yesterday. I was at the Mystic Hilton, which was a stop on the Friday night fight circuit. We loved it as kids because it was just like the coolest hotel. They had so much going on there. And my dad would take me to Friday night fights, and my brothers. And we had gotten wind that Marvin was there. And he wasn't there. This is like a part that probably makes a lot of sense. Is he wasn't there for the fight. He just happened to be in Mystic, Connecticut for some odd reason. But he got swarmed in the lobby because you'd never seen him, you never heard of him. This was probably 10 years after the Leonard fight, and he couldn't have been any more gracious. I made it a point to talk to him, and everyone was wanting pictures, and that's just what I'm hearing too, which really makes me happy, and I think a lot of fans will agree, is that the public interactions people had with him were very good. He might have come off as this bruiser inside the ring and this guy to take no prisoners, but like you just said, he was such a gentleman outside of it, and a lot of fans are pouring in with their recollections on Twitter of that. He was such a good guy when they did meet him at an event.
Yeah, his interactions with the public were, like you. I was around many of them, and I can't remember one that wasn't good. If it was not going to be good, it certainly wasn't something that came from him. We all know that sometimes everyone that's in the spotlight in life, from time to time, somebody approaches you in a sideways way. That's just going to happen no matter who you are. But for the most part, they don't. But for him, unless somebody did that, his interaction with them was going to be as nice as possible.
Let's go to 1985. Hagler Hearns. You're on the call for the fight, and I had read something last night which I thought was just really cool. The fact that when you think of Marvin Hagler, he was like the prototypical looking boxer, the bald head, the muscles, just looked like a fighter, and so many iconic moments of his career are now like etched in stone. And one of those was the war hat, the red hat. And you interviewed him before the fight, and like there was this talk, like we just spoke about, the fact that he's not really in a good mood, or he doesn't want to do a lot of pre-fight interviews, but you were pretty confident that he would be able to put forth a good interview because of the relationship you have. Just take us to that pre-fight interview and the fact that when he pointed up to the hat, the war hat, did you think that even 20, 30 years from now, it would be such an indelible moment?
Yeah, well, it felt a little bit like it, and I remember when that interview was going to happen, some people were wondering, would he come here? Somebody said, I hear he's not in a good mood. I said, I'm telling you, he's going to be here, and we're going to have a fine interview. And I think we did. And and I felt it. I knew that, that was going to be the case. And yeah, the hat lent itself to that. And to me, he kind of created an interesting, iconic moment with that. And he did that a lot in his career. People don't think of him as a showman, and he wasn't a showman exactly, but he was aware of important moments. And he had a style about him that was, I think, lent to or added to the drama of his fights. And that was a perfect example.
Now the fight happens, and from what I hear, it was a decent fight, right? Some things happened in that first round that were, no, I'm just kidding, I'm underselling it. One of the best middleweight fights of all time. It happens, and you're in the ring afterwards. I know you called the fight as well. I want to go to the post-fight. It looked like a chaotic scene inside of the ring after the fight. Take us through that moment. You're early on in your broadcast career, and yet also I want to give you even more credit. There's a thing now on Twitter called freezing cold takes, where if you make a terrible take, they try to expose you. But the fact that you said, I think we just witnessed the best round in middleweight history, that right there is a take that stood the test of time, Al.
Yeah, and I'm not, there's the funny thing, and you know me, and most people that have seen me broadcast for 40 years, I'm usually not given to make those kind of statements. It's not my style as a broadcaster. It doesn't roll off my tongue. It came out of me in an organic way that I almost couldn't control, and ended up, being something that people are quoting now and that resonated with people. So, and yeah, that experience, it's not about me, it's about him, but you touched on, for me, I was 5 years into my broadcasting career, and all of a sudden I'm ringside, and I had done the Hagler-Duran fight pay-per-view, which was pretty extraordinary, but to be doing this fight, it was me and Al Michaels and Kurt Gowdy. So I was on a broadcast team that was, I was like in awe of working with those men. And here we are in this amazing moment. And then I'm thrust into the post-fight, as you point out, and the chaotic atmosphere in the ring. And I was keenly aware. I have to tell you, a lot of times you're not keenly aware of the moment and how it's you think the impact's going to happen, and you're not really supposed to be because you're concentrating on your job. But you could not be a part of that and not feel that this was something that was going to be, looked at for years and years and years and decades to come. And it places a little extra pressure on you to make sure you didn't gum up the works, but it was extraordinary, and you knew that his thoughts after that fight would be ones that people would chronicle for years.
A ton of people are flocking to YouTube this week to watch the fight, and that's probably the fight that he'll always be remembered for. Is that war with Tommy Hearns, and just being in the ring. There's nothing like, you can attest to this. I've done a few. I can't even compare myself to what you've been a part of, but just being in the ring after a fight, there's so much adrenaline in there because the winning is just like contagious. The energy that the fighter gives off is contagious in there, and I could just imagine what was going through your mind being in that ring at that very moment.
Yeah, you're right. There's always that after a fight, and then you can multiply that by 5 or 6 times for this moment when when everyone knew, everybody standing there, the participants, everybody that was involved, you knew this was extraordinary. I mean, you knew that you were experiencing an extraordinary moment, and it did turn out to be exactly that.
How about everyone flocks to those two fights, and when it comes to Hagler's career, the Tommy Hearns fight and the Ray Leonard fight, which happened in 1987. Is there another fight on there that fans should know about? Is there another moment in covering them? Like I'm sure you have some. Just please share.
Yeah, I think a lot of them, because there's one obvious one, and that is this fight with John Mugabe, which is a lost gem. That was a fight That was ironically the fight in which Ray Leonard looked at it and said, I should try.
Yeah.
I might be able to try Marvin Hagler.
Mm.
Because John Mugabe, who fought the fight of his life that night, fought the best fight he's ever fought. Unfortunately, that fight took so much out of him, he was never able to achieve that again. But he was a monster, especially at 154, but he was moving up to 160. But John Mugabe fought the fight of his life. Marvin Hagler responded in kind. And again, this is an older Marvin Hagler facing this young lion who's a monstrous puncher. They produced rounds in that fight that are spectacular.
Yeah.
And that anybody wanting to see the heart and ability of Marvin Hagler should look at that fight. And then the other point I would make is those fights where he was defending his middleweight title against, for instance, Juan Domingo Roldan, who was a rough customer, and scored the only official knockdown of Hagler, but it wasn't really a knockdown. It was more of a push, but they called it a knockdown. That fight demonstrates the ability he has. And then he was able to take good fighters like Hamsho and Obel Mejias and Simpson and these good middleweights that were around during his time, and he made them look completely ordinary. And that was part of what, he fought every guy that he could fight that was around in the middleweight division. And here's the other thing, and fans now, think about it. He didn't jump up and down in weights.
That's admirable.
Middleweight.
Yeah.
So the world had to come to him. And so could there have been a match that Marvin Hagler could have made with some other 154 pounders down at 154 or up at 168? Maybe.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, Duran came up to face him at middleweight. Mugabe came up from 154 to face him, and the rest of them were middleweights except for Ray Leonard.
Yeah, that just shows you that he just did his career his way. I'm staying at 160. I'm a middleweight. I'm retiring. I'm not coming back. This is how it's going to be done. Man, there are a lot of comparables
in one
to
of his fights, I'm pretty sure he did walk-in. His walk-in music was Frank Sinatra, My Way, the song My Way. I remember one of them. I don't remember which fight it was, but
Wow.
he used it as a walk-in.
Well, didn't Hopkins did that as well?
Yeah, Hopkins also, yeah.
Another legendary middleweight. And the middleweight division is one that has, like, everyone goes to the heavies or everyone goes to the welterweights as two glamour divisions in boxing. But I feel like Hagler put it on the map. And is it safe to say he's the greatest middleweight? What do you have him?
Well, he could be, yeah. I mean, I think there's a strong case to be made for that. I believe he would have beaten Carlos Monzon had they fought. That's just my opinion. I believe that he and Sugar Ray Robinson would have been a fantastic fight. Now, Ray Robinson was a better welterweight than a middleweight, but he was a spectacular middleweight. That would be the fight of the century, in my opinion. That would be extraordinary. But I think you can make a strong case for Marvin Hagler being the best middleweight of all time.
Al, do you take time I ask this to all the legendary guests that I have on. Do you take time to kind of take a look back at your career and the things that you've been able to see and the friendships you've made and just being part of boxing for 40 years, man? I've been in it for a couple of years and I'm already like, man, this sport drives me crazy sometimes. But being in it for such a long time, have you taken any time, like when you hear news like this, does it make you reflect a little more?
Oh, 100%. That's a very good question. It does make you reflective because your mind naturally wanders back. I'm very centered on the present, and mostly have been in my career, and even the way I call fights. I don't bring a lot of past moments into it. Once in a while I will, but I don't lean on that. And the way I function mostly as a broadcaster, I do often go back and tell stories from the past because people want to hear them.
Yeah.
But I'm not centered there. But when you have a moment like this, it forces you to go back and start remembering things. And I just interviewed Larry Holmes for my show, and that made me do it. I mean, we all, your dad, I'm sure feels this way. We all look back at the 80s especially, as a magical decade in boxing. Now,
Yeah.
I know that things get built up because of memory, and oftentimes people remember things in a grander way than they might have been. But I think the one exception to that rule is anybody remembering the 1980s in boxing. It was extraordinary. And I once had breakfast with Gil Clancy, the great manager, trainer, broadcaster, who of course had seen all the other decades, or many of them before. And I said, I said, I'm new to this. This is like in the mid 80s. I said, it feels like what we're experiencing now is amazing. I said, is that true? How does it feel compared to all the other decades? And he looked at me and he said, this is special. He said, I don't even know if we've seen the like of this before. And he probably could have said, we may not see its like again. And it certainly was one of the best times in the sport of boxing.
Great place to end. That's the beauty of boxing. The history is so deep, and you're part of history. You're part of boxing history, and it comes full circle now because you get to tell your stories to me and the younger generation, and then I'll one day get to tell them to another one. So that's the beauty of boxing to me. And it's a sad thing that Marvin Hagler passed away, but we get to, you have great memories. My father has great memories. Michael Buffer.
Yeah,
great
I
memories.
agree with you. That's the nice thing is that you can look back and have fond memories of him and what he did both inside and outside the ring. And that's what sustains people. That's what will sustain his wife in this difficult time, and his family, and all the people that knew him so well. And not every death of people profoundly affects others the way that this one is doing right now. I can tell you that.
Yeah, we're seeing it happen right in front of our eyes. Al, I could talk to you all day. I feel smarter when I talk boxing with you.
You're very nice. Well, you're doing a great job, and you are in the next wave of folks that are chronicling the sport of boxing for people, and you're doing it on a different medium, one that is now the part of the norm. And while boxing and all sports rely on their past, they also are evolving, and they look to the future, and that's what you guys are doing.
Wow, really, really appreciate that, Al. Thank you so much, Al Bernstein. You'll see him on a weekly basis over on Showtime Boxing. Thanks, Al.
Take care.
Special thanks to Al, and that's just incredible. I mean, Al Bernstein is a walking boxing encyclopedia. Being just 34 years old and only 5 years into your broadcast career, and you're calling Hagler versus Hearns. Just unreal stuff from Al, and a really great remembrance of Marvin Hagler. So I appreciate Al Bernstein for coming on. One of the nicest guys in all of boxing. All right, coming up next, Michael Buffer, who didn't exactly cross paths with Hagler in the ring. He said he only announced one of his fights, but had a lot of moments with him over the years, whether it's at the International Boxing Hall of Fame, the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame, just run-ins. Michael Buffer knows literally everyone in the sport of boxing, so his stories are welcome. So here's Michael Buffer on his thoughts on Marvin Hagler. First of all, you did a phenomenal job with the 10-bell salute, emotional, and it's not an easy thing to do, especially when you have a personal friendship like you had with Marvin Hagler. So, phenomenal job with that. And I think the 10-bell salute is just such a great time-honored tradition in boxing. But going back to your friendship with Marvin Hagler and your time with Hagler, what stands out to you the most? And if you have any stories or memories or just anything you'd like to say about the fabulous life of marvelous Marvin Hagler.
One of the things that stands out to me, besides just those great moments in the ring, and I was blessed to get to introduce him once in his career, because I was more or less starting out as he was wrapping up his career. Was in 1984 when he at Madison Square Garden when he fought Mustafa Hamsho in their second fight, and I think he stopped him in the third round. Just a masterpiece of a performance, and I used to love the way he would go from orthodox to lefty, and just wow, and with power in both hands. I remember watching his one-round KO of Caveman Lee, which was with a jab, he knocked him out in the very first round on probably on ABC Wide World of Sports. Just a great fighter. But one thing that always stands out in my mind is that after he moved to Italy and was making movies there, when he would come back, and if I ran into him within the first couple of weeks, he had an Italian accent. And he would be like, "Hey, Michael, how you doing?" And he would talk like this, And then if it was maybe a month after he'd been home, there was a bit of a Brockton accent. And then if he connected with a few buddies from Newark, New Jersey, it was like a North Jersey accent. So, he would, but the same thing happens with me. If I talk to my sons and they're back in the Philadelphia area, mm-hmm. and all of a sudden we start saying the word coffee, and the old accent comes back. But,
that's crazy. That's like me in New York.
Yeah, a friend of mine just actually sent me a text this morning saying, "Do you remember the time that we ran into Hagler in L.A. Back around '95, and he was talking like an Italian, with his hand?" I said, "Oh yeah," but that was always a great moment. Because he was married. Kay is Italian, his wife, and he was making movies in Italy and never looked back. He walked away and never looked back. And from what I understand, when Bob Arum approached him with the possibility of a rematch, it was already a year or two later, and with Sugar Ray, and he just said, he probably said it with an Italian, "Hey, tell Ray to get alive."
Forget about it.
But, yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing about Marvin Hagler is obviously he's so unique in all the ways that you spoke about in the ring. His style of fighting, how he had to get to the top. No, not an easy way, a ride to the top, really earning it. But the fact that how he went out is so admirable, because you've seen this, Michael, like these guys that hold on for too long. Like, you never want to see your hero get beat up. Like, you never want to see Muhammad Ali take a beating in the ring, and that's happened. And it's happened to a lot of fighters because they have a tough time knowing when to say goodbye. I think that just added to the allure, and I think that added to the mystique of Marvin Hagler, is the fact that he said, "Listen, I'm done with boxing because of this bad decision. I'm out. I'm leaving." And then when the rare times that you did see him, if he showed up at the International Boxing Hall of Fame, or he showed up at the Nevada Hall of Fame, it meant something. It really meant, like, to see him and get a picture with him, or just to talk to him. It was just a rare sighting of seeing him meant so much more.
Yeah, it really did. He wasn't happy with that decision, and he said, "Okay, that's it." He was the highest paid athlete in the world in 1987, so he walked away with a lot of taxable money in his pocket, and he lived happily ever after. It was so difficult Saturday to wrap my head around the fact that at 66 he was gone, and ironically, that's Alan Minter, mm-hmm. who he beat to win the title in London, passed away just 4 or 5 months ago too, and Leon Spinks, just a few months ago, around the same age. Just hard to get a grip on it, guy. I knew as the years went by that there were older fighters that it was going to happen where I'd have to say a 10 count, mm-hmm. Max Schmeling, Jack Dempsey, Sugar Ray Robinson, who passed away back in the 80s. And you never think that somebody who's younger than me and I'm going to have to get up there and have to announce that 10 bell memorial count. And that was one of the really tough ones because it was so sudden. Usually there's a day or two to prepare, and you've gone through a little bit of grief, and this one here, it was really hard not to get choked up.
Special thanks to Michael Buffer. I love that story about Marvin Hagler with the different accents. That was the coolest part about Hagler to me, the fact that he just moved to Italy, he started making movies, had all different accents, kind of a Renaissance man. Coming up next is my father, Bob Canobbio, creator of CompuBox, And Marvin Hagler's career has a special meaning to us at CompuBox because Hagler versus Hearns was just the third fight in the history of our company. It helped put our company on the map. Marvin Hagler went on the Johnny Carson show the week after he defeated Tommy Hearns, and Johnny Carson actually brought up the punch stats. So it has a special meaning to us at CompuBox. I know it has a special meaning, his life, Marvin Hagler, to my dad, Bob Canobbio, who spent many memorable nights in Las Vegas, Atlantic City, all over the country during the 80s with Marvin Hagler and the Four Kings. I think you enjoy this. Here he is, creator of CompuBox, Bob Canobbio. All right, it's time to bring in a very special guest, very near and dear to my heart, not just because he is my dad, also because he's my boss, all rolled into one, the creator of CompuBox, Mr. Bob Canobbio, a guy that was around for it all, probably has seen every punch thrown and landed since 1985, has seen a lot of marvelous Marvin Hagler's career, and someone that I wanted to catch up with on this special Marvin Hagler remembrance episode. Bob, I'm going to call you Bob, all right? So how you doing?
That's okay, Daniel. You can call me Bob. I'm your boss. I think I work for you nowadays.
Did I say did I mess it up?
It's
you're
all
my
good.
boss. You're my boss.
It's all good, Daniel.
Yes, you sign the checks. Yeah, so we're here to talk about marvelous Marvin Hagler. We spoke with Al Bernstein. We spoke with Michael Buffer, two of your longtime friends, and I've just asked them what's like when the first thing you hear from about Marvin Hagler is what?
Wow, when I think of Marvin Hagler, it's like synonymous with the birth of CompuBox. I mean, the third fight we ever did was Hagler Hearns at Caesar's Palace. Everybody knows how great a fight that was. It was something. Caesar's Palace, when I was younger watching fights from the pavilion, I always wanted to get to Caesar's for a big fight. It was one of my goals, one of my dreams. And so when we got HBO as a client, we looked at the schedule and we saw Hagler Hearns, April 7th. And, that was our ticket to Vegas, ticket to the big fight. And, little did we know it turned out to be, people are talking about as one of the greatest first round ever, but maybe the greatest middleweight title fight ever. So when I think of Marvin, I think of the birth, the origin of CompuBox.
Yeah, and yeah, I stole your magazine right here, KO magazine, hangs in my kitchen now.
It looks good. That's good.
That thing pops. That's they need to go back to that yellow and red. Something about yellow and red. There's a reason why McDonald's is also yellow and red, because it just screams. That's such a classic photo right there, classic fight poster. And yeah, you brought up, like, obviously Marvin Hagler was before my time, but I was able to learn about him from you. Guys, being around guys like Al Bernstein and Buffer, mostly you, just hearing your stories, and like Hagler, the fact that you were at Hagler Hearns, like that's like goes down in like history. That's like a night that doesn't even feel like even really happened, because it's so like the mystique, so much mystique around it. But the fact that it put CompuBox on the map because of all the stats in the first round that you'll get to, but also because of Johnny Carson, right?
Well, yeah, after the fight, Hagler threw in the first round, he threw like something like 90 punches, and they were all power punches. I was counting Hagler. Logan had Hearns. And I remember the first round ended, the place is going crazy. I'm not literally, people were jumping in their out of their seats. I look down and I see the punches thrown, and it's all power punches, no jabs. I remember relaying it to the truck. My buddy Mike Whalen was doing the graphics at the time, and Mike Sheehan, who was also now the very high up the ladder at NBC. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking, you got to get this stat in. It's unbelievable. Hagler threw 85 punches in the first round. It was 82 actually, and no jabs. We got to get this stat in. So at first I said, oh man, hopefully I hit the right key, but no, it was obviously that kind of round. Looking back, I don't go back and look over many fights, watch them again, but this one, because it was such a spectacle, I went back and watched. But yeah, so Marvin goes on Johnny Carson a week later, and Johnny's like, Marvin, you were like all business in that first round. You threw like 90 punches and no jabs. And Marvin was like, yeah, I came out, it was war. I wanted to hurt him, and that's what I accomplished what I was looking to do. So again, that put CompuBox on the map as well. The fact that here we are, 3 fights into our existence, and you're talking about CompuBox on Johnny Carson, who was like the king of television, king of late night at the time. So I mean, when that happened, I'm like, where do we go from here, man? Like,
Well, the good thing is that there's a lot to go from there. I mean, 1985 was right in the swing of it. Like Tyson was just coming up, and I know how much you love Johnny Carson, so that must have been the only thing he could have just added to it is if Johnny said courtesy of CompuBox. Come on.
I know I'm a little disappointed in Johnny, but that's okay. The point was well taken. I'm sure everyone eventually would know where those numbers were coming from.
Well, the thing about it as well is something I tweeted out after I got the news was Top Rank posted the first round again, and I went into the database and found all the punch stats, and a lot of the numbers are just absurd, and there's still a record today, right? 95 combined power punches is still a record in the middleweight division, correct?
Yeah, the 95 power shots in the first round
combined. That's absurd.
Combined was crazy. I mean, because Tommy Hearns was a boxer. He liked to jab and move. I'm sure that's what his game plan was going in, but Marvin was on him like white on rice, man. And Tommy had no choice but to rumble in that first round.
Mm-hmm.
So he had to try to keep Marvin off him, and in doing so, ended up throwing. Tommy actually threw 61 power punches in that first round, landed 45. So uncharacteristics of Tommy, but he had no choice but to engage Marvin because Marvin was looking to take him out.
Fight fire with fire.
Exactly.
You were only 30 years old at that time, and Al Bernstein, who we just spoke with on this show, was 34. So the fact that it's like 2 young guys, in Las Vegas for that type of fight. I mean, what was like the aura? I mean, what was it like heading into that fight? Like, just Marvin Hagler at that point was like a star.
Well, we knew the buildup. We knew the buildup was from the buildup. We could tell it was going to be a special night. The fight was actually on a Monday night, if I remember correctly. So we got into Vegas early. We got in like Friday to get acclimated and to check out the weigh-in and all the other festivities. And the place to be back in those days was the Caesars Pool, which was outside the venue. And we'd go there and we'd hang. That's where the press was, and a lot of the public, obviously, people who were going to the fight. And you could just sense from the buzz. This was on in the casinos too, on Saturday for a Monday fight. That it was incredible. The anticipation, and oftentimes we know in boxing it doesn't always lead. The anticipation doesn't always play out in the fight itself. But this played out, and you could just sense that it was going to be a special night, and it was.
All right, 2 years later, Sugar Ray Leonard versus Marvin Hagler fight you were also there for, and a fight that you were very much heavily involved with. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but back then, it doesn't really happen so much today, is where fighters would hire CompuBox to kind of help them draw out a game plan. And well, just take us through the beginning parts of that, how that fight was set up, and the fact that you were with Ray. He was working at HBO as a broadcaster. We sit next to the broadcasters at fights, so we're part of the crew. And Ray at that point was on the shelf. Hagler had just fought Mugabe. Leonard took a look at him, right? Take us through that.
Well, the Hagler Mugabe was sandwiched in between the Hearns fight and the Leonard fight, and that was the fight that convinced Ray that he could hang with Marvin, because Marvin showed signs of, he slowed down a bit in that fight. But I feel like Al said earlier that McGarvey just fought the fight of his life in that fight. And I'm not so sure Marvin was really into that fight. Marvin wanted to retire after the Hearns fight, but he didn't, and he went on. But that was a great fight and a tough fight for Marvin. Took a lot out of him. Ray sitting ringside. After the fight, we crossed paths, and Ray's like, "I got him." I'm like, "What?" He goes, "I can beat him." I'm like, "Okay, it's Marvin." He goes, "I know everyone thinks I'm crazy, but I can beat him." One thing led to another, and I remember talking to Ray's right-hand man was Ollie Dunlop, who traveled everywhere with Ray. And I told Ollie, if Ray is serious about fighting Marvin, we have all Marvin's fights in our database, and we could work up a scouting report. Of course, from my recollection, from what I could see, outside of the Hearns fight, Marvin was a pretty slow starter. He normally started slow and then gradually built up. And one thing led to another. We did the study on Marvin, and we saw that the first 4 rounds, he starts slow. Well, for him, slow in the 50s, and then he would slow, his punch output would increase over the course of the next 8 rounds. So we put that scouting report together, and we actually went to Ray's training camp in January of '87 in Maryland, Palmer Park, Maryland. We charted some of his sparring sessions. He didn't look great. He looked okay. It's hard to tell from sparring, but he looked okay. I mean, I wasn't sold that he was, gonna beat Marvin, but we did put that scouting report together, suggested that Ray come out fast, because Marvin has a tendency to start slow outside of the Hearns fight. And sure enough, as it played out, Marvin comes out in an orthodox stance in the first couple rounds, and Ray Leonard comes out and sweeps the first 4 rounds on the judges' scorecards, which ultimately got him the decision. So
didn't he also end? He had the flurries at the end, so he started fast and would end fast.
Yeah, that was an old Ali trick that Ray copied. Especially the end of the round, because if you listen to that fight, you can hear Ollie Dunlop in the corner, 30 seconds, 30 seconds. And that's when Ray would flurry and, try to steal rounds. But yeah, Ray, it worked. Everything came together for him that night. But we were very proud of the fact that we were able to put together that scouting report on Marvin, and that it helped Ray. I mean, it really did. It helped him prepare, and it played out exactly the way we predicted. So I think that gave a lot of credibility to the stats as well. That it wasn't just a live service. We also could do more with the data, like to put together scouting reports, which we do now. We provide, as you know, we provide all the pre-fight punch stats and comparisons for fighters. So yeah, it started at a way back when, and one of the biggest fights ever. So that's something that we're very proud of, and will stay with us forever.
How about the story about sometimes you tell me stories about what happens behind the scenes. Like, it's something that happens today too, to a lesser degree. When you hang out at fights enough, you become friendly with the fighters. You find yourself out. You find yourselves, in social situations on the road. There was an encounter that you have to tell us and everyone listening about, when you saw Ray Leonard and Marvin Hagler in a bathroom. Take us through it, please.
Yeah, it was at a club in Vegas. We were all out shaking a leg a little bit, and I was in the bathroom, getting ready, leaving the bathroom. All of a sudden, I see Ray Leonard comes in the bathroom. Like, okay, and then behind him is Marvin Hagler.
Oh man!
So now I'm at the sink, drying my hands, and I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. Marvin Hagler and Ray Leonard are in this freaking bathroom together, and Marvin was like, well, in a good mood. He's like, "Hey Ray, how you doing, man? Everything good?" And Ray is like, "Hey Marvin, I'm not here to make friends. I'm not here. And he just walks out of the bathroom. So to me, that was the beginning of the head games that, that Ray Leonard succeeded in putting on Marvin. He just, was just playing with Marvin, and it actually bared out in the fight when Marvin came out and boxed when he should have attacked Ray in that first round. But it was all part of Ray's MO to get inside the head of Marvin, and the late Marvin. I don't mean to disparage him in any way, but it is what it is, and that's something that went down way back in the day.
That's wild. That's a story right there, and it's true. I mean, so after the fight, Hagler, speaking of them dancing, remember after the fight, that's one thing that always stuck out when the legendary nights and was how Hagler was dancing in the ring after the fight. It's very uncharacteristic of him. Like, that's not something he ever did.
No, it was all business, right? I honestly think that he knows that he got Ray got the better of him psychologically, leading up to the fight and in the fight. Yeah. And that little move at the end by Marvin before the decision was just his way of saying, hey, it's all good. I outboxed him, but as the judges decided, that wasn't the case.
These are the best stories. This is why the Four Kings will always be remembered forever, because each guy is like their own king. Like, each guy has their own style. Each guy has their own stories. They all fought each other spanning 10 years. Hagler, Hearns, Hearns versus Leonard versus Hagler, Duran fighting all of them. I mean, we can go on and on and on with all these stories, and it's just like the golden era of boxing. That's why I think that when you talk about Marvin Hagler, you have to bring up Tommy Hearns, and you have to bring up Ray Leonard. You have to bring up Roberto Duran. It's just all part of their legacy. That's a beautiful thing. And that's something that I know that a lot of boxing fans today want to see that happen with some of the young fighters today. And you'll see a lot of that this past couple of weeks in terms of, using this, Marvin's death to kind of compare to today's boxing, which I don't exactly think is fair. Like, I do want to see it get back to that. But, it's a different time, a different place. Like, even what Al was saying in the previously before you came on is that things were different back then in every way possible. Like, the media and players and boxers, the athletes, all mixed together. They mixed together a little more. And that shows that with that story, phenomenal story. But from there, that's when Hagler disappeared. That's when you didn't hear from him anymore. He moved to Vegas and to Italy. And you never heard from him, right?
No, you basically did not hear from him. He showed up occasionally at the Boxing Hall of Fame. We saw him that one time at the in Connecticut at the Mystic Hilton.
Yeah, never forget that.
And there was no fight. It was just, I don't know what he was doing there, but he was getting ready to do road work. Remember, he had a tracksuit on, yes, and he got mobbed, but he was just doing, I don't know what he was doing there. But I saw him one time at a fight. I forgot what fight it was. And we had known he was in Italy. So I said, hey, I gave him a little business. Hey, Marvin, como esta? And he goes, hey, don't yank on my chain. So he was, he had a little sense of humor, but he did say it in an Italian accent. He did pick up an Italian accent, as Michael Buffer mentioned too earlier on the show, that he actually had an Italian accent mixed in with the Massachusetts accent, which can be very unique in its own way. So, the combination of the two accents was like, okay, Marvin, this is Marvin Hagler speaking here, so we have to, give him his props. But it's a strange accent coming out of his mouth.
I mean, it's all part of the lore. It's all part of the legacy. It's one of the greatest boxing stories from like pretty much rags to riches. His first fight was for what, in a gym in Brockton or in a gym for $50, and then wasn't part of the Olympic team like Ray. Worked his way up. His first title fight, getting pelted in the ring. Didn't get that chance to really earn it or really savor in it, all the way up to retiring into Italy and becoming doing movies and now the first one to go. It's unbelievable.
Another thing too, he was such a loyal person too.
Yep.
I mean, Aaron tells the story. They went up to New Hampshire to try to sell him on the Leonard fight, and Petronelli brothers were in the car with Aaron, and they got out of the car at Marvin's house. They told Aaron, wait in the car we'll go talk to Marvin. So they were on the porch, and Aram could see them speaking from the car. They were on the porch, and they see Marvin slamming his hand down. Like, Aram sees that, and he's like, they go back to the car, and Aram's like, oh, what happened? He wasn't happy with the guarantee. And Petronelli goes, no, he was mad because we offered to cut our share from 30% to 15%. He was mad that we would do that. He insisted that, we get our clean share regardless of the money. And Marvin was guaranteed 12 million in the Leonard fight. And I think he ended up making something like 18 million with the back end. So he was just a loyal guy on top of being, a lunch pail kind of fighter. And, he's going to be sorely missed. It's still a bit of a shock to think that you think of Marvin, you think of this figure, this perfectly tuned fighter. He just looked the part, and he acted the part, he fought the part, and you'd never think that, he would go at a relatively young age. So, it was quite shocking, but we're feel very fortunate to be able to see him fight, especially in his prime, in those, what do we mention, the three biggest fights in boxing. Really, you have to say that Leonard Hearns, even Mugabe, if people watch that fight, it's going to be more and more appreciated. And the Leonard fight, which he came up a little short, but he easily could have got the decision in that fight. So, I mean, they were just three historical evenings, something that, CompuBox will never forget, and we're very fortunate to be a part of.
All right, Bob, I thank you for the time. Thanks for giving us these great stories about marvelous Marvin Hagler. What a time. I'm lucky to hear the stories firsthand, and now everyone else can hear some of these great stories. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Dan. Take care.
Thank you so much to everyone that joined us for this special remembrance episode of Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Yes, that is his legal name. He got it changed because he wanted to be known as Marvelous, and man, was he ever. One of the four kings is gone. It's a tough thing to swallow in the boxing world. Those four guys, I feel like, will live on forever, and they will. Marvin Hagler might be one of the most respected of the four kings because of how he went about his career and how he went about his life, as evidenced by our amazing cast of guests on this special edition. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for tuning in. Dan Canobbio signing off. We'll see you next time. Another edition of Inside Boxing Live.